Alright, this is my second go at it. This is going to be a how-to / informational video on my case that I designed. This is going to be the 400 series case. And what I'm going to do is try to run through as quick as I can the install process for power supply, main board, video card, cables. It's not a cable management video. I'm going to try to just show how everything goes inside the case as quickly as possible and what it comes with. You can see on the right here we've got all your adapters, power supply angle adapters depending upon which way your power supply goes, your nuts, bolts, everything. These are clear stickers. They're actually they're a nice rubberized clear sticker. Could be silicone. Those are designed for the stand. Once we get done, if you put it vertically, they fit very well. I've cut them to length to be as close to the same length as each foot as possible, so you can apply them yourself if you're going to put these this stand on glass or something, so you don't scratch it. But again, everything's going to be sold as is, so it's going to be at your own risk. So make sure that whatever you do, you try it on your surface, or try installing your hardware, measure your hardware, make sure it all fits. That being said, you can see that all this is included. Like I said, screws, nuts, bolts for mounting everything, the USB cable, the PCIe extender, the power supply adapters. In the main unit, we've got the LED controller with an LED strip on the front and the back over the I/O plate on the main board. And then we'll be installing the extender, and there's places to mount 4 2.5-inch drives at the back, and there'll be some caveats to that I'll go over when we get there. The power supply is going to go up here, main board, drives, and then the video card is going to go in here. The video card, it accepts up to about a 290 mil length, and it better be a standard width. This is just the Vega Series LE card. It's a nice size. If you go too wide with this, what you're going to run into problems with, and this has about 2 centimeters, by the way, in length over the extra that you could install a longer card in. But if you have a wide card that expands beyond standard slot lengths, you're going to come into problems with the PCIe connector on the main board here, because it's going to want to come up, and due to the height in which the video card has to sit, it could actually interfere. So make sure that you have a video card that is a standard width and not one that is an extra wide width, like a Strix card or something that's going to be a little bit too wide for your main board. I'll try to get some numbers on that very soon. That said, I'm going to go and get started. What you should have with your case are six different actual pieces to the case. There's the main unit. There's going to be the vented cover. There's a stand that comes with rubberized. It's kind of like a gasket on each side, so that it's not paint on paint and you don't scratch it. Then there's the side panel that'll be powder coated, any number of colors that I have in stock. This is going to also have the GPU adapter bracket for fitting on the back side of the case and holding it in place, and then the power supply adapter bracket. It takes only SF style PSUs and ITX main boards. It does not take SFXL because it would interfere with the button on the front and the LED controller. Okay, so I'm going to get started. What I have is I'm going to be doing using a Corsair power supply. This is an SF600. It's fully modular, and I have a custom set of cables that I had made for it. These are extra long cables actually, so I'm going to have a little bit of overlap that I'm going to have to deal with when it comes time to installing it. And with your power supply, what you want to make sure with the SF series, the SFX series, is that the fan is always intake from the top, because this vented cover, this is your air intake side. So everything you do, from the power supply to the CPU to the video card, everything has to come in on this surface area. So make sure that whenever you install something, you're installing it with the fan facing, as I will reference here, up. It mounts on the back using this power supply adapter, and then once you put it on, this adapter is going to slide right into place with these two studs. a key thing to know is these studs have nuts that go on them. What I want to do is, particularly with this side, start the nut a little bit before you go to install it, because once you get this installed, it's going to be difficult to get your finger in there. So I'll go ahead and start with the PSU, and we'll do the screws first. Every one of these cases also is going to come with this tool set. It has lots of different heads on it. It's not super expensive, but it comes with it, so you have everything you need to install. I'll be using the Phillips head number 2 and the 5/8 inch socket for the putting the PSU studs or nuts on the studs. So I'm going to start with the these are the PSU screws. Every set of these screws is labeled and has a quantity with the size on it. So if you lose them, you can contact me, or you can look it up based on what's listed on the bag. There are 5 screws here to do, and 5 screws to install. You don't have to do all of them, but if your power supply mates well, I'd probably just go ahead and install them, because then worst case scenario, you have an extra screw or 2 lying around in case you need to take one out from here, for example. You don't just toss it in the garbage. Now's when I'm going to take the PSU nuts, separate baggie, quantity 2. These are 632 nuts as well, and I'm going to go ahead and start them on these studs. I'm going to go a little fast because my camera only records about 15 minutes worth of video at a time. There is a gasket or a rubber strip underneath this lip that holds the power supply in. So when you go to install the power supply, angle it down and then push in. And then you can slide it. You should be able to slide it wherever you need to slide it. Try to make it, as far forward as you can on the case as possible. And before you install, I just caught myself, you want to make sure you get your angle adapter in, because this tab here where the stand installs might actually interfere. So you'd have to take this back out to install that, especially in the SF600 case. You see, I wouldn't be able to necessarily install this back in. So let me go ahead and tighten this down. I obviously can't look straight down, so it's hard for me to find that screw or the nut. Power supply's in. Next up is going to be the main board. This is a BioStar X370 GTN with a 1600X Ryzen and 2 3866 sticks of G-Skill CAS level 16 RGB DDR4 sticks. So it's a nice main board, nice and small. It was one of the first Ryzen ITX main boards that you have. When you go to install this, angle the I/O. By the way, the I/O shield's already installed here, so I might as well pull it out and show you. I'll go ahead and put it back in. But when you go to install the main board, make sure that you angle the main board down towards the I/O shield, and then move the rear side down along the power supply side, because what you're going to find is this is extremely tight in here, as most cases are, and it may even rub just a little bit, but if you push, it will come down. I don't think, there we go. So now it's down. I need to get the main board screws. There are 4 of these, 632. Typically main board screws are not 632s. Just so you know, these are bigger screws. Everything on here is 632 that we'll be using, including everything that mounts to the cases, but for the side panel. I tried to make it easy, so if you need to get new screws, it's easy to figure out. It's just a 632 for about everything. I don't think there's anything that's not. outside the USB adapter, which is pre-installed. Don't over tighten these. I think that's a big mistake a lot of people make, is they think they have to tighten them down. You can ruin the fastener, you can strip it out. You don't want to do any of that. Okay, so the main board's in. Next thing I want to do is try to get the power connectors in. That's the CPU. I want to do the main board power, the 24 pin. So on this Corsair, it's extremely tight down here in the corner. You may have to find yourself wiggling around. You can't always loosen this LED controller. It's just got 4 screws in it. You can loosen it, move it out of the way, put it back after you get everything installed. And I actually had to do that to remove these 2 connectors because the tabs end up being installed down, so you can't really get your fingers underneath it to loosen them up. And then what I'm going to do is try to play with this and see. Yeah, that's the best way to do it. All right. It did click in place. Okay, so power's in. You can see these cables are a little bit longer than they should be because this was designed for a power connector up here actually. So it's a little bit long, and I'm gonna have to zip tie that down, keep it straight. CPU connector coming up next. Now I did with these cables. I've got the specs saved, and I ordered them on Mod DIY. So if somebody wanted to get the specs from me, they're more than welcome to contact me and get those. The set cost about $100, and I'll show you one of the reasons why it did. Because I got my SATA connectors all custom fit. This only takes a 4-pin CPU power, so I've got a dangling 4-pin cable up here. Now, if I were really trying to get this finalized, I would probably try to play with these cables and keep them a little bit more organized. But I'm going fast here because I'm going to run out of time on the video if I don't. This is the power connector for the button. Some of these, the black ones, the label will say reset switch because I purchased power buttons or power cables and they came labeled reset. I'm not going to order them again because they take forever to get here. So know that there is no reset button on this case. You have a power switch on the back to turn it off, and so you'd have to hard reset it. That's just a sacrifice I decided to make because I didn't want 2 buttons. It's just increasing the cost for me, and I find myself not using it any more than turning the machine off and on, cold booting it. You may think otherwise, but that's just not a concern for me. If you wanted to, you can always drill one in the back side of the case. That was where I was going to put one if I had to, instead of on the front, because I like the simple, slim look of just having 1 button. This is the custom cable I got. What it has is different lengths for the SATA drives, and it's got 4 of them on here. I probably won't use this myself unless I get a super big SATA drive. But the neat thing is, because the LED controller has a fan, it's a fan connector, although it's 4-pin and this one's 3. I could adapt that, but still, this has got the little fan connector built into it, so I don't have to power the LED controller off the main board. That said, I have to do it now because I made this a 4-pin connector for the LED controller, and this is a 3-pin connector, and I'd have to modify it, cut the side off or something in order to get it to fit right, or I'd have to rewire this connector. Not a big deal, but just so you know, I'm gonna, for time's sake, I'm gonna use the main board as my power for the LED controller. Now I'm plugging this in because even though I'm not using that fan connector, I am going to use this SATA connector just to show you that a SATA drive can be installed. I'm going to install one right here. And the way you do that is you find the hard drive screws. There's 16 of them come in the kit. They're all M3 by 5.5 or 6, depends on which batch I bought. So some will be longer than others. If they don't fit your drives, you can order more for yourself. They're not very expensive. I can even direct you on how to do that. What you'll do with the 2.5 inch drives, flip them over, and then you'll just want to line up the holes on the back. These mount flush. The drive's flush, so if you're having a problem with your connectors, power or data for your SATA, you're probably going to want to install a spacer of some kind around these. You do have a little bit of leeway, especially if you install thin drives, slimline drives, 9 millimeters. Or 7, I think they make them now too. So this is, I think, a 12 because it's an old OCZ, I think it's a Vertex 3. It's just an old disc that I had lying around on my shelf. I don't have a whole lot of spare 2.5 inch drives. You can see the back side here while I've got it open. You can install and remove the M.2 adapter, as well as you have access to your back support for your heat sink and fan, so you don't have to take the main board out to, you know, do any maintenance on these things. Also, if you wanted to, you can buy some thermally conductive tape and put it on the back of this M.2, because what ends up happening when we close this case is this side panel, which is made of aluminum, goes right here. So it would be a great heat sink if you decide to put some thermal tape in there and fill this void between the back side of the M.2 and that panel. Coming back over here, because it mounts flush, you got to make sure your SATA connectors are pretty thin, or you're going to have a hard time getting them to plug in. The other thing is both the data and the power connectors need to be pretty thin to fit. This even, it fits, but it's angled. I'm not a big fan of it. I probably wouldn't do this, angle it myself like that if I had to in the future. And this data cable is, which end do I want to use? This data cable also fits really tight and snug, so it can be a little bit confusing. And again, this is not a video to show cable management. This is just simply to show you that you can install this. If I was really trying to manage these cables, I'd obviously buy a much shorter SATA cable. The LED controller, I am going to run, let's see, through here and up to this main board fan connector. It is a tight fit, it just barely fits. Not a big fan of doing it this way, but do what you have to. I'm sure you're getting some great noises on the video here too. All these nylon cables touching each other. Alright. LED controller is plugged in. CPU's plugged in. SATA's plugged in. Next up, I'm going to install, let's do the USB cable. And then what I'll do is I'm going to stop this video and start up another one, and I'll splice them together in the end, because I want to make sure I don't get cut off. You want to route this USB cable however it makes most sense to your main board and its layout. Some of these cables are going to be really tight and close to the vented portion of the case. So be gentle with them. They don't like to be bent, but you gotta bend them. Don't know what else to say there. There's just not much you can do. Alright, I'll just leave this here. I may tidy it up a little bit before I come back. I'm probably going to zip tie this down too, but you don't need to see that. So I'll pause. Alright guys, I'm going to give this one more chance. I've done this 3 times now. My camera keeps cutting off for different reasons, so hopefully this will work. Next up is the PCIe connector. I'm trying to make this, it comes flat. I'm trying to make sure that when I bend this, because it needs bends when I install it, the ribbon cable has to actually go back underneath the PCB. In order to do that, what I did was I took a 90-degree bend right off of the female side of the PCB and did a 90-degree bend up, and then I did the 180-degree bend back so that it's just strictly 180-degree on the ribbon cable itself and not right off the PCB. If you do that, I've noticed that some of the shielding may start to come off, although I don't believe that impacts performance, but it's just a note that it puts a lot of strain on the connection right here coming out of the PCB. So do a 90-degree, this is what I found, is best to do a 90-degree right off the PCB and then 180 degrees back and another 90 underneath on the female side. On the male side, it's pretty straightforward. You just want to keep it probably you end up doing like 120, 150 degree bend. Just don't do it right at the PCB because again, you don't want to put strain on the pressure that these rivets are putting on the ribbon cable. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and put this and get this guy installed, and we'll see if this works. Now I've got 2 more screws, 632s, that hold this female end in, and that's going to help support the video card when we decide to install it. Just drop that. What I failed to mention this time around is underneath this female end of the PCIe extension, there's a little adapter with some slots in it. What that'll let you do is if you need to adjust the positioning of the video card forward to back so that the I/O ports line up flush to the back side of the case, you can loosen those screws up. They're also 632s, and you can use the Phillips head number 1 or number 2 to loosen that up, and then you just adjust it back and forth. However, I pre-fit all of these cases using this video card right here. So I use this Vega 64 card, and I put it in, I installed it, and I made sure that the adapters, the PCIe extension location fits perfectly to that particular card. It should be all the same, should be very similar, so you shouldn't need to adjust that. In order to mount the video card in though, not only are we going to use this PCIe extension female end to hold this side of the card up, which is quite sturdy, but we're going to use this aluminum angle bracket here. On one side you've got 2 holes that are evenly spaced apart, and on the other side you've got 2 holes spaced, but they're off center. Now this off-centered side is going to be what you're going to use to mount to the video card. And it's going to be a little bit unique from what you're used to, because typically you would mount the adapter plate, or you'd mount the video card onto something and then screw in from the back side. But with this adapter, we're going to actually screw in from the what I'm going to call the inside of this bracket. And I've got these specialized screws, these GPU screws. The bag's labeled GPU screws. It's number 632 by 1/8 inch, and they're all going to be black screws. It's a very short 632 screw, and it's going to allow us to mount this and not have a whole lot of interference on the rest of the case when we decide to slide this in. You just kind of put it in, and do not over tighten these. You need to be very careful with this angle bracket because it is aluminum and it's tapped to be 632. But if you over tighten it, you will strip this. You need to be very careful with the aluminum tap on this. You just need it kind of snug. You don't need to get it really tight or anything, and then you won't run the risk of stripping them. Obviously, the more you take them in, remove them and install different video cards in your case, you may experience some loosening of those threads, and you might run higher risk. But with those screws installed, now we just install a video card. The way to do that is you point the I/O ports down, and you slide the forward facing part of this angle bracket towards the slot in the rear. You try to get it in there flush to the back so you have as much clearance on the front side of the case, which is the rear, near the rear of the video card. You want to have as much clearance here as you can get. And then you want to move the card away from the PCIe extension and slowly rotate the rear end of the card back, and it'll start sliding into place. Now the reason it was so dramatic there is because I've still got the HDMI or DisplayPort covers on this, and they just got through the hole. And once you line it up with a PCIe slot, you should be able to simply slide it in. I say simply, but it helps if you get it lined up. There we go. And these PCIe extensions, I'll have this tab on it. You'll know you're fully connected when this tab pops into place. Like that. Now when you go to remove it, what you're going to want to do is make sure you put your finger on this tab and pull it back, or it's not going to release when you go to remove it. You would just pull that back, push it away, lift up the rear, and move it this direction. You want to make sure you watch clearance on this side of the bracket for capacitors and other I/O ports and things on the main board. You don't want to start scratching your capacitors or doing those damage. It will be close, so you've been warned. Put this back in, and then what we're going to do is finish installing the video card. There are 2 more GPU screws that go on the back side, and these are going to be silver screws, always silver, and they're labeled GPU bracket screws. It's kind of redundant because though that was also GPU bracket screws that we just used because it's the same bracket. And what we're going to have here is these slots in the back. We're just going to put this in, and that's going to keep the video card from going up and down relative to where you installed it. And it's also going to help tighten it up into the back of the case. These screws will over time leave marks on the black cases and the silver cases because they've got some rough faces on the inside of them, but it's the back of the case, and those are good screws. They're nice and wide heads. So now the last thing we have to do before we start putting the case together is we got to install the power for the video card. I'm using these 8 to 8+2 connectors. So if you had a video card that only required 6, you could pull that off. But this is Vega, so we're going to require all 8 in both spots. And in fact, I may have a problem with that USB again when it comes time to installing it on this part. And because this card is a blower style card, I think it's going to work pretty well. Even though it is Vega, it's going to run hot. It's going to work well for Vega in the small form factor to help keep the case temperatures cool, because it's going to exhaust it right on out the back. Now, I think I have everything in here connected and like it should be. Last thing I'm going to do before I start shutting up the case is plug in the power connector to the power supply. One of those clips came off. So there we go. I'm all plugged in. So the remaining screws are going to be all for the case. Product manual for the LED controller, and the feet and adapter we don't need for the power supply anymore. This is the vented case. As a note, you should be able to tell that one end of this is a little bit longer than the other as far as the solid portion is concerned, not the vented. The vented portion is a little bit offset, is another way to put it, I guess. And the side with more solid space here is going to actually be the front. And the reason for that is because if you look at the bottom of this, I had to make a wide interface, or a wide section here for the USB adapter. I had to put fasteners in on this guy, and so this portion had to be that thick. It made no sense to put the vents over something that was just going to be solid, so I extended the vents as far as I could into this section right here. So the vents themselves should line up so that your USB side is going to be on the front, and so it's going to be this end. Now, one other thing to consider before you go installing everything in your case is going to be which orientation do you want this case to be in. If you want it to be horizontal, it's pretty easy. You just take your thumb screws and you put your little feet on the back sides of them, and then you screw in the panel on the back side with your thumb screws, and it would sit just like this. It would sit just like this on a desktop or table or what have you. I'm going to go vertical, but the nice thing about vertical, depending upon which way you want these vents to be sitting, if you want them sitting this way and blowing this way, you would put the stand on the bottom. But the design also allows you to put it this way. Maybe you like your monitor on this side of the case, and you don't want all that noise blowing at your, right at your ears while you've got the computer on, so you face the fans away from you. And you would put the stand on the other side. The stand goes on either side, is my point. And that really doesn't change much of the orientation of the front. It just changes which end of the USB adapter is on. I think I'm going to install the stand on this end. So what I'm going to do is, we have 4 stand screws. They are wafer head, which means they're a very thin headed screw. And these are 632. They're labeled as long. There are 4 of them. And then what you have alternatively are 8 short screws. They're 632 wafer head screws, and they'll come with 8. You will only need all 8 of these if you are not intending to put the stand on. The longer screws are for the side where you install the stand. The shorter screws, and why there are 8, is because there are 4 on each side, and if you put it horizontally, you'll want to use the shorter screws instead of the longer ones. Hope that made lots of sense. I don't know that it did. But we'll go ahead and install the stand using the longer screws. And because they're powder coated the same color as the case, being black, it is it's going to look quite nice on the top where we I can't see, but it'll look nice on the top where it's the same color. Obviously you can't predict what color somebody's going to want the stand to be, so I just made all of the stand screws black. And I know that installing 4 screws per side is going to be a little bit annoying every time you want to get into the case. I understand that. That's valid criticism. But I wanted to make sure that the stand had good support, and that the case itself, the vented portion of the case, wasn't going to look funky because I only had 1 screw on the front and 1 on the back. May have over-engineered that portion of it, but so be it. So this is on. Do not over-tighten them. Don't push too hard. The stand is on, pretty solid. I just lifted it by the stand. I'm going to turn it over now, and we're just going to put the 4 short screws in. I only need 4 of them, not all 8. And one trick I learned is back it out and wait for it to click, and you know the threads are lined. There you go. Now on the silver ones, I did not powder coat the silver short screws or the long ones. They'll look a little bit polished. But on the black ones, I powder coated them the same color as the case. Again, you don't need to over tighten these. They're simply there to hold the vented panel on. They don't need to be too tight. They'll start bowing in the middle if you do it too tight. Okay, so we have the vented case on, vented panel. You can see the components inside, rather tightly fit, but it'll work. And the last thing we have to do, I'm going to move these screws out of the way, we'll put on the side panel. Now what I try to do with the side panel is paint it so that each side is the same quality. So if you wanted to put a sticker on this side and put a different kind of sticker on this side, you should be able to do that no problem. You just flip it when you want to, change it up. I've got a pretty good process for doing that. And these thumb screws will fit pretty easily. I've glued in, on every one of these, I've glued on a little plastic washer. So what happens is when you go to put these screws on the panel, they won't scratch it. At least hopefully not. You just have to put the panel on. I should put it this way. Try to hold it there and just screw it in with your thumb. I have a tendency to leave them a little bit loose so that I can adjust it after I get all 4 of them in, because there is a little bit of play. So you can kind of try to line it up a little bit better to the top. Tighten those top screws down a bit. We have quite a bit of play right there. There we go. Okay, build is complete. Last thing that I wanted to do was plug it in. I think I'll put it horizontal so that you can see it a little bit better. I think the focus probably was off. But I'm going to go ahead and plug it in, and it should work if I've done everything correctly. If I haven't, be the next YouTube sensation. Flip it on the back, hit the power button, everything comes on. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope that clarifies more about this case, what you can do with it. I've really enjoyed designing it. I'm quite proud of it. I hope that people get a lot of enjoyment out of it. It was supposed to be something just fun for me to do, and here I am at almost 1 a.m. trying to make a video. I'm no videographer, and I don't have a whole lot of professional equipment, so that would explain why this video is the quality it is, and why it looks like it's in my kitchen, because it is. But I hope you enjoyed it.